Sir, what are you doing parked here? You waiting on someone?
No, I'm reviewing work. Is there a reason for this stop?
This vehicle matches recent theft patterns. Does this SUV belong to you?
It does. My identification and credentials are in my pocket.
Have you ever found yourself on the receiving end of a snap judgment? A moment where someone looked at you and, within a fraction of a second, wrote an entire fictional narrative in their head about who you are, what you do, and whether or not you belong. We all navigate a world filled with preconceived notions. But what happens when those unfounded assumptions are armed with a badge, a gun, and the authority of the state? Today we are diving into a story about power, the absolute necessity of maintaining your composure, and the devastating consequences of letting bias dictate your actions. Before we unpack how one veteran patrolman's disastrous miscalculation dismantled his own career, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had to deal with someone who completely underestimated you? The morning air in the city's premier financial hub was crisp, carrying the scent of expensive artisanal espresso and the faint metallic tang of the subway grating several blocks away. This was a neighborhood meticulously engineered for success. The architecture was a breathtaking blend of restored century-old masonry and towering spires of reflective glass. Every inch of the pavement was pristine, traversed by venture capitalists, corporate attorneys, and executives whose daily schedules were calculated down to the minute. You would not find delivery vans idling here during peak hours. The streets were an unofficial showroom for the latest European luxury imports and chauffeur-driven executive town cars. It was an environment that broadcasted an aura of immense quiet prosperity, accompanied by an invisible set of expectations regarding who fit into this high-stakes ecosystem. Dr. Marcus Vance belonged in this world implicitly. At 46 years old, he possessed a commanding, stoic demeanor forged through decades of high-pressure medical and legal environments. He was a man of science, precision, and unwavering discipline. Dressed in a flawlessly fitted midnight blue cashmere sweater and tailored slate trousers, his aesthetic was one of refined elegance. Marcus served as the county's chief medical examiner. His daily life was a grueling marathon of forensic pathology, collaborating directly with the district attorney's office and delivering crucial, airtight testimonies in complex homicide trials. His mind was constantly analyzing variables, dissecting trauma, and relying purely on empirical evidence. On this particular Wednesday, Marcus had managed to carve out a fleeting 15-minute window of absolute peace before his next brutal cross-examination at the downtown courthouse. He was parked legally in a designated zone, sitting inside his brand-new, top-of-the-line imported luxury SUV. The vehicle was a monolithic presence, painted an obsidian black that looked like liquid glass under the morning sun. The engine was silent. Inside the heavily insulated cabin, the chaotic symphony of the metropolis faded away entirely. Marcus sat comfortably in the premium leather driver's seat, holding a ceramic cup of dark roast coffee while reading through highly classified toxicology results on his encrypted tablet. He was not loitering. He was not disturbing the peace. He was simply existing, taking a brief, well-deserved sanctuary in a public parking space. A few blocks down the avenue, Officer Thomas Barrett was beginning his mid-morning patrol. Barrett was a seasoned veteran of the department who prided himself on trusting his gut instincts above all else. However, over the years, that so-called intuition had warped into a rigid framework of personal biases. He viewed his patrol sector not merely as a community to protect, but as a territory to govern. He drove his heavy patrol cruiser at a creeping pace, scanning the sidewalks and parked vehicles, constantly looking for anything that contradicted his personal definition of normalcy. As the bulky police interceptor rolled down the affluent avenue, Barrett's gaze snagged on the gleaming obsidian SUV. The sheer value of the vehicle drew his attention first, but as he peered through the driver's side window, his focus shifted entirely to the man behind the wheel. In an instant, A deeply flawed psychological mechanism engaged in Barrett's mind. He did not witness a traffic infraction. He did not see a weapon, narcotics, or any sign of a struggle. He had no reasonable, articulable suspicion, the bedrock legal requirement for initiating a detainment under the Fourth Amendment. Instead, Officer Barrett looked at a deeply successful man quietly reading a tablet in a six-figure vehicle and allowed an unfounded assumption to dictate his next move. He decided, based purely on a toxic internal narrative, that Marcus did not belong there. From inside the sound-dampened cabin of his vehicle, Marcus was initially oblivious to the patrol car. He was deeply engrossed in dissecting a discrepancy in a blood alcohol report, but out of deeply ingrained habit, his eyes flicked to his rear-view mirror. The situational dynamics shifted violently. The police cruiser, which had been rolling forward, suddenly slammed on its brakes, causing the heavy front suspension to dip aggressively. Ignoring the flow of active traffic and the blaring horn of a frustrated commuter behind him, Barrett cranked his steering wheel hard to the left. The patrol car's tires shrieked against the pavement as Barrett executed an entirely reckless, unsignaled maneuver, whipping the heavy vehicle around to position it directly behind the luxury SUV. He closed the distance with intentional aggression, slamming his vehicle into park mere inches from Marcus's rear bumper. It was a calculated tactic designed to physically trap the civilian vehicle, a clear escalation meant to intimidate. Marcus calmly set his ceramic coffee cup into the console holder. He looked up at the mirror again. The quiet morning was suddenly fractured by the blinding, erratic flashes of red and blue emergency lights. There was no siren, just the silent, oppressive strobe effect flooding the pristine interior of the SUV. It was an unmistakable projection of dominance. For the average citizen, this sudden display of state power would induce immediate panic. A spiked heart rate, trembling hands, and a mind racing to figure out what they had done wrong. But Dr. Marcus Vance was not an average citizen. He spent his entire professional career maintaining objective clarity in the face of horrific violence and extreme tragedy. He understood the psychology of power dynamics, intimidation, and aggressive posturing far more intimately than the patrolman currently stepping out of the cruiser. Marcus did not sigh. He did not curse. He simply locked his tablet, placed it face down on the passenger seat, and rested his hands prominently at the top of his steering wheel. Through the side mirror, Marcus watched the interaction begin to unfold. He heard the heavy metallic clank of the cruiser's door opening. Officer Barrett stepped out onto the asphalt. Before even taking a full stride toward the civilian vehicle, Barrett adjusted his utility belt, letting his dominant hand rest deliberately against the grip of his service weapon. It was a subtle, universal gesture of physical threat, an attempt to establish absolute control before a single word was spoken. Barrett swaggered toward the driver's side door, operating under the absolute certainty that he was about to dominate a nervous, compliant subject. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that he had just illegally detained the county's foremost forensic authority, a man possessing the administrative leverage and legal expertise to dismantle Barrett's entire livelihood with a single, well-placed email. Barrett stopped deliberately short of the window, positioning himself tactically behind the structural pillar of the SUV's doors. This specific placement forces a driver to crane their neck uncomfortably backward to communicate, instantly placing the civilian in a vulnerable, submissive posture. It is a textbook psychological maneuver. Inside the cabin, Marcus pressed the window control. The thick, tinted glass glided downward with a soft electronic whir, allowing the cacophony of the city and the harsh glare of the emergency lights to flood into his quiet sanctuary. Officer Barrett leaned forward slightly. He did not offer a greeting. He did not state his name, his badge number, or the legal justification for the traffic stop, completely bypassing standard operating procedures. Instead, he utilized the first few agonizing seconds of the encounter to aggressively inspect the interior of the vehicle. His eyes darted past Marcus, sweeping over the plush leather seats, the uncluttered floor mats, and the center console. He was desperately hunting for a pretext, a stray wrapper, an unfamiliar scent, a sudden nervous twitch, anything that could retroactively transform his biased misjudgment into a legally defensible search. Finding an immaculately clean vehicle, Barrett's frustration mounted, but his arrogance remained entirely unchecked. He shifted his attention to the driver. "Morning," Barrett stated. The word was not a greeting, it was a verbal tripwire. His tone was heavy, authoritative, and laced with suspicion. "You waiting to pick somebody up around this building?" It was an investigative trap, designed to manufacture reasonable suspicion. If Marcus answered affirmatively, the officer would demand names, business suites, and relationships. If he answered negatively, Barrett would immediately question why he was idling in a commercial zone, potentially framing it as loitering or casing a building. Marcus did not twist his torso. He merely turned his head, his calm, analyzing gaze meeting the officer's aggressive stare. He offered no placating smile. He kept his hands perfectly still on the steering wheel. He exhibited absolutely zero signs of the fearful deference that officers like Barrett feed upon to validate their authority. "No," Marcus responded. His voice was an instrument of pure clinical detachment. It was steady, resonant, and completely devoid of anxiety. "I am reviewing professional correspondence." The silence that followed was heavy. To an officer operating on bias, a civilian who displays no fear is deeply unsettling. It feels like a challenge to their power. The complete absence of submission in Marcus's brief answer struck a direct blow to Barrett's fragile pride. The officer's posture stiffened. He abandoned the thin veneer of a casual check-in. "Do you have an office in one of these towers?" Barrett pressed, his eyes sweeping over Marcus's luxurious sweater, silently calculating the cost and determining in his flawed judgment that the man before him could not possibly afford it legitimately. "Yes," Marcus replied. Just one syllable, no nervous rambling, no desperate attempt to list his credentials or prove his worthiness to exist on a public street. Marcus was a master of the courtroom. He knew that volunteering unprompted information was the fastest way to lose control of an interrogation. He provided the exact legal minimum, offering zero conversational oxygen for the officer's fishing expedition. Barrett's irritation spiked into visible anger. He shifted his stance, his hand moving closer to his holster. He was losing control of the psychological environment, and he needed to force the driver onto the defensive. Failing to extract a verbal slip-up, Barrett pivoted his attack to the most obvious target, the extraordinarily expensive automobile. The officer let out a condescending scoff and slapped his palm against the roof of the SUV. "Beautiful car. It actually belonged to you?" "It does," Marcus confirmed, his expression remaining as unreadable as carved stone. "Is that a fact?" Barrett challenged, his voice dripping with heavy, undisguised skepticism. He took a half-step backward, making a theatrical show of looking up and down the length of the immaculate vehicle. Barrett was now fully committed. He had initiated a stop without cause, and he desperately needed a bureaucratic shield to protect himself from the inevitable administrative fallout. He resorted to one of the most heavily abused excuses in the modern patrol manual. "Let me explain how this works," Barrett commanded, stepping back into the window frame, his voice dropping into a harsh, demanding register. "We have been dealing with a massive spike in high-end automotive thefts. In this specific financial sector, sophisticated crews targeting luxury SUVs, grabbing them while the owners are busy inside. You fit a certain profile." Barrett paused intentionally, waiting for the driver to crack, waiting for outrage, defensive arguing, or a nervous plea for understanding. Those reactions would give Barrett the excuse he needed to escalate. Marcus merely blinked. He absorbed the blatant lie with the analytical coldness of a scientist viewing a predictable chemical reaction. Therefore, Barrett continued, leaning in closer to maximize his physical presence, I am going to need to verify the legal ownership of this automobile. Hand over your state-issued driver's license, your vehicle registration, and your proof of insurance, right now. In his mind, Officer Barrett had just secured the victory. He believed he had successfully weaponized a fabricated local crime wave to validate his own prejudiced assumptions. He was completely oblivious to the reality that he had just issued a hostile command to a man who held a security clearance and bureaucratic rank that dwarfed the precinct captain's. Standing by the open window, Barrett braced himself for the usual resistance. He expected the driver to scramble nervously, drop his wallet, or launch into a loud, emotional argument about his rights. An argument would be perfect. It would provide the exact legal framework for a charge of disorderly conduct or interfering with an investigation. Dr. Marcus Vance denied him every single one of those opportunities. He understood that debating constitutional law with an irrational street cop on a power trip was dangerously futile. The side of the road is never the place to litigate your rights. Instead, Marcus opted for a strategy of weaponized, chilling compliance. I am now going to open my glove compartment to retrieve the vehicle's registration, Marcus announced. His tone was methodical and razor-sharp, echoing the precise cadence he used when dictating autopsy notes for an official public record. Following that, I will reach into the interior left breast pocket of my sweater to secure my credentials. By narrating his every micro-movement, Marcus was neutralizing the officer's ability to claim sudden fear. He was systematically eliminating any possible excuse Barrett might manufacture to justify drawing his weapon. Barrett's hand tensed instinctively over his duty belt, but Marcus moved with agonizing, deliberate slowness. He reached across, popped the latch on the compartment, and withdrew a sleek leather folio containing the vehicle's paperwork. Returning to an upright posture, he slid 2 fingers into his sweater pocket and pulled out a heavy credential case. He did not simply extract a plastic license. He handed the entire consolidated stack of documents through the open window. Barrett snatched the items aggressively and stepped back to examine his prize. He flipped open the folio first. The vehicle registration was crisp and current. Registered owner, Marcus Vance. He glanced up at the identification number etched into the dashboard glass. A flawless match. The fabricated narrative of a stolen luxury car disintegrated instantly. Frowning, Barrett shifted his attention to the driver's license. The photograph was an identical match to the stoic man sitting in the vehicle. The residential address listed was located in a gated community renowned as one of the most affluent and exclusive zip codes in the entire state. Then Barrett's eyes fell upon the leather credential case sitting beneath the standard paperwork. This was not a cheap novelty wallet. It was heavily constructed, bearing a massive, meticulously engraved solid gold-tone shield displaying the official Great Seal of the state. Directly beneath the metal badge, secured behind a thick, tamper-proof, transparent window, was an official government identification card. It featured a holographic security overlay, a scannable barcode, and a title printed in stark, undeniable typography. Chief Medical Examiner, County District Attorney's Office. The psychological impact of what he was holding hit Officer Barrett like a physical blow. The reality of his colossal misjudgment cascaded through his mind. He had just executed an aggressive, entirely baseless traffic stop on the highest-ranking forensic physician in the jurisdiction. The very man whose detailed scientific testimony was the foundational pillar for nearly every major homicide conviction his department secured. A rational, self-aware officer would have experienced immediate remorse. A smart officer would have handed the credentials back with trembling hands, stammered out a profound apology regarding a terrible misunderstanding, and retreated immediately to his cruiser. But Officer Barrett remained frozen on the asphalt. The ambient noise of the city seemed to mute itself as a suffocating silence stretched between the 2 men. Barrett stared down at the gleaming gold shield. His thumb nervously traced the raised edges of the state seal. A visible pulse began to throb rapidly against his collar. He looked up from the undeniable proof of Marcus's authority and stared at the calm, impassive face of the man he had just attempted to humiliate. The cognitive dissonance was too massive for Barrett to process. His ego simply could not reconcile his deeply ingrained biases with the empirical evidence resting in his hands. He refused to accept defeat. He refused to let this man walk away with the upper hand. In that critical moment, instead of de-escalating, Officer Barrett made a career-ending choice. With his jaw clamped tight, Barrett let out a derisive scoff. He roughly shoved the leather credential case back through the open window, letting it fall carelessly onto Marcus's lap. "Nice try," Barrett barked, his voice straining with a harsh, desperate bravado. The pretense of a routine investigation had completely vanished. "You really think flashing a shiny piece of metal buys your way out of my traffic stop? Anybody can order a prop badge and a fake leather wallet online for $30. Marcus did not touch the wallet resting on his legs. He merely maintained his piercing eye contact with the officer. The sheer, blinding audacity of the accusation hung thickly in the morning air. "I am going to give you one final lawful order," Barrett commanded, taking a wide step backward and wrapping his hand firmly around the grip of his firearm. "You need to step out of that vehicle right now." This was the climax of the officer's desperate strategy. In the United States, under the legal precedent of Pennsylvania versus Mims, police officers maintain the authority to order drivers out of their vehicles during a lawful traffic stop for officer safety. Barrett was hoping that Marcus, insulted and outraged, would refuse. A refusal would be the golden ticket. It would classify Marcus as non-compliant, giving Barrett the legal cover to shatter the window, physically extract the doctor, and apply violent force under the guise of resisting arrest. Dr. Marcus Vance refused to give the officer that satisfaction. "Understood," Marcus replied smoothly. His voice never wavered from its chilling clinical baseline. He offered no arguments. He did not threaten the officer's job. He simply allowed the man to continue constructing his own professional scaffold. Marcus unlatched his seatbelt. The metallic click echoed loudly in the tense environment. He reached forward, powered down the engine, and removed the electronic key fob, placing it conspicuously on the dashboard where the officer could see it. He then pulled the interior release handle. Barrett took another instinctive step back, widening his stance in anticipation of a physical confrontation. The heavy armored door of the SUV swung outward. Marcus stepped out onto the roadway. He was an imposing figure, tall, broadly shouldered, and commanding. As he stood to his full height, his physical presence easily eclipsed the officer's. Yet Marcus did not puff out his chest or step into Barrett's personal space. He simply closed his vehicle door with a firm push and stood perfectly motionless. He placed both of his hands on the sleek roof of the SUV, keeping them entirely visible and empty. His posture was relaxed, yet radiating absolute, undeniable authority. "I have exited the vehicle as instructed, officer," Marcus stated, angling his gaze downward to meet Barrett's eyes. "What is your subsequent command?" Barrett swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. The imposing physical reality of the man standing before him, the pristine tailoring of his clothing, and most alarmingly, the complete and total absence of fear began to shatter the officer's remaining resolve. He had braced himself for screaming, fleeing, or a chaotic struggle. He had no protocol for dealing with a subject offering absolute, terrifyingly calm compliance. Barrett reached up with a trembling hand and unclipped the radio microphone from his shoulder epaulet. He had pushed the situation far past the point of no return. He had forced a citizen out of their vehicle on a busy public thoroughfare in broad daylight. He desperately needed dispatch to confirm the badge was fraudulent, or he was going to face an administrative nightmare. "Stay exactly where you are," Barrett snapped, pointing a gloved finger aggressively at Marcus's chest, trying to project a confidence he no longer possessed. "Don't twitch. I am running your identity." Marcus did not blink. He merely watched the officer operate, observing him with the detached interest of a biologist watching an organism struggle in a petri dish. Standing in the harsh morning sunlight, Barrett pressed the transmission button on his microphone. A sharp hiss of static cut through the air. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, Barrett called out, fighting to keep the tremor out of his voice. "I need an immediate priority verification on a county-level credential. Subject's name is Marcus Vance. He is claiming to be—" Barrett hesitated, his face twisting into a mocking sneer to mask his rising panic. "The chief medical examiner." "Copy that, Unit 7, the dispatcher's voice crackled back instantly over the external speaker. "Hold for verification." The ensuing silence was agonizingly profound. 10 seconds ticked by, then 20. The bustling city life continued to flow seamlessly around them, pedestrians walking briskly on the opposite sidewalk, unaware of the immense power struggle occurring beside the parking meters. Barrett kept his hand rigidly near his weapon, his eyes locked desperately onto Marcus. Marcus casually lifted his left wrist and checked the time on his luxury chronograph, a micro-expression that brilliantly communicated exactly how trivial and irritating this entire ordeal was to his highly scheduled day. Finally, the radio broke the tension. The dispatcher's voice projected loudly, echoing off the surrounding glass facades. "Unit 7, dispatch. Be advised, credentials for Dr. Marcus Vance are fully confirmed and flagged as highly restricted. Subject is the active seated chief medical examiner for the district. Identification number Delta 9er2. I am showing a critical alert linked directly to the district attorney's executive office. Unit 7, do you have an active homicide scene requiring his immediate presence?" Officer Barrett froze entirely. His thumb slipped limply off the microphone button. The radio went dead. The words "fully confirmed" and "flagged as highly restricted" seemed to hang suspended in the air. The color drained completely from Barrett's face, leaving him a pale, hollow shell of the aggressive enforcer he had been just moments prior. The arrogant predator vanished, instantly replaced by a man who realized he had just walked blindly into an administrative buzzsaw. He had targeted, harassed, and illegally detained the highest-ranking forensic official in the city on absolutely zero legal foundation. Barrett swallowed forcefully. He looked down at the leather wallet he had so arrogantly dismissed, then slowly raised his eyes to meet Marcus's unwavering stare. Dr. Vance," Barrett stammered, his voice fractured. The authoritative bark was entirely gone, replaced by a thin, desperately pleading whisper. We received a vague description of a vehicle matching this profile. It was a preemptive—" "Stop!" Marcus did not yell. He did not raise his volume even a fraction of a decibel, but the sheer sub-zero authority compressed into that single word severed Barrett's pathetic excuse instantly. Marcus slowly and deliberately removed his hands from the roof of the vehicle. He reached inside the open window, retrieved his credential wallet from the driver's seat, and smoothly secured it back inside his sweater pocket. He then turned his body to squarely face the officer, his eyes dropping briefly to read the metallic nameplate pinned to Barrett's uniform. "Officer Barrett," Marcus said, his tone resembling a judge delivering a final verdict, "you did not run my license plates prior to initiating those lights. You saw exactly what your prejudices wanted you to see, and even when you were presented with a graceful opportunity to correct your misjudgment, your ego absolutely refused to let you de-escalate." Barrett opened his mouth to apologize, to beg, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was paralyzed by the sheer gravity of his mistake. "My department coordinates directly with your precinct commander on a daily basis," Marcus continued smoothly, his dark eyes locking onto Barrett's pale face. "My vehicle is equipped with a continuously recording high-definition internal and external camera system. I will ensure the unedited file is on your captain's desk before you finish your shift today. He should see exactly what kind of proactive police work his veteran officers are engaging in." Marcus did not linger to witness the officer's complete psychological collapse. He turned smoothly, slid back into the driver's seat of his SUV, and pulled the heavy doors shut. The solid, insulated thud severed the connection between them. He depressed the ignition button, and the massive engine roared smoothly to life. Officer Barrett remained glued to the pavement. His arms hung uselessly at his sides. He stood in complete, suffocating silence, watching as the sleek black vehicle signaled cleanly, pulled away from the curb, and vanished into the bustling city traffic, leaving him entirely alone with the devastating ruins of his career. What is your take on how Dr. Vance handled this incredibly tense situation? Did he play it perfectly by letting the officer dig his own grave, or should he have immediately demanded a supervisor to the scene the moment the lights went on? More importantly, do you think an officer like Barrett actually internalizes a lesson from an encounter like this? Or is he only remorseful because he accidentally targeted a man with more power than him? The reality is, composure is your greatest weapon when dealing with unchecked authority. Letting someone else's assumptions drive your emotional response only gives them the power they are desperately seeking. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I read every single one of them. If you appreciate these deep dives into real-world accountability and the power of keeping your cool under pressure, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more content. Stay sharp, stay safe out there, and I will see you all in the next one.